Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was often said that Walter Harris that he was one of those men you don't see, but without whom everything would collapse. Stratonix Technologies, a giant in artificial intelligence and predictive modeling, he had no office, no prestigious title, and no stock options. And yet, without him, nothing really worked. Every day, without fail, from 5:30 a.m., he walked through the large glass doors of the Boston headquarters. He put on his blue badge marked "Maintenance Personnel," adjusted his gray cap, and pushed his silent cart through the still empty corridors. He was the one who turned on the first lights, who opened the windows, who disinfected the offices, who cleaned the screens and surfaces in the coding rooms as well as in the board rooms. From the server room, cold, illuminated by blue LEDs, to the CEO's luxurious office on the top floor, decorated in leather, marble, and glass, Walter knew every corner, every smell, every sound. He knew which chairs creaked, which fluorescent lights flickered, which soap dispensers emptied faster than others. He had seen 5 technical directors come and go, 3 restructurings, and the arrival of the robotics division. And yet, he had never sought attention. He only spoke when addressed. He always responded with a smile and a respect that commanded respect. Yet, despite his years of service, few people really knew Walter. Some didn't even know his name. Those who spoke to him often called him Mr. Harris, believing they were doing the right thing. But no one knew his struggles, his sleepless nights, his story. He had lost his wife Sharon in a car accident when their son was only 9 years old. From that day on, he had shouldered everything alone: meals, homework, laundry, childhood nightmares, unpaid bills, and that dull loneliness that sets in when you carry everything without ever complaining. His son, Elijah Harris, was an extraordinary boy. Ever since he was little, he had this fixed, intense gaze that seemed to want to pierce things, take them apart, understand them. He asked questions that even teachers hesitated to face. Why does 0 multiplied always give 0? If infinity has no end, then can it be divided? Or, why do we say that artificial intelligence learns, when it understands nothing? At an age when other kids were clamoring for a console or a ball, Elijah spent his days with an old notebook where he jotted down everything that fascinated him: Fibonacci sequences, logical paradoxes, fractal structures, algorithms inspired by life. It wasn't bragging, or even ambition. It was like an inner fire that wouldn't go out. Walter, although unable to follow all of his son's reasoning, did everything to feed this passion that he discreetly searched offices, archive rooms, or recycling bins. When he worked late at night, he brought home damaged technical manuals, forgotten PowerPoint presentations, sometimes even prototype components discarded after failed tests. Elijah, for his part, was collecting everything. He read every page, deciphered every formula, and practiced tirelessly on an old computer his father had rescued from a storage closet. He had taken it apart, cleaned it, rebuilt it piece by piece, until it worked. The computer was slow, worn, noisy, but it was his observation tower on the world. Every night, while his father slept exhausted on the sofa, Elijah was exploring open databases, downloading scientific papers, and dissecting lines of open-source code. He had taught himself Python, C++, and the basics of machine learning, simply because he wanted to understand how things worked. He had never asked for private lessons, nor demanded recognition. He was simply thirsty. Thirsty for knowledge. Thirsty for logic. Thirsty for meaning. And all the while, Walter watched him, silently, often from the doorway, his heart swelling with a strange mixture of pride and fear: pride at how far Elijah was going, fear of never being able to give him the means he deserved. But what neither Walter nor Elijah knew yet was that a simple whiteboard left in a meeting room would soon turn everything upside down. This Saturday night the air was freezing in the deserted streets of Boston. The sky was heavy and leaden, and the few streetlights cast a pale light that reflected off the immense windows of the headquarters of Stratonix Technologies. Walter Harris, dressed in his threadbare jacket and knitted cap, had accepted exceptional night shift. The management had requested a complete disinfection of the premises in preparation for the visit of a Japanese investor known for his obsession with detail. Walter didn't like leaving Elijah home alone when he was working so late, especially on a Saturday. But he hadn't found anyone to babysit, and his son, as he often did, looked up from his notebook and said calmly, "I can come with you. I'll stay somewhere quiet, I promise." So they arrived around 8 p.m., alone in the large, silent building. Only the emergency neon lights flickered faintly in the corridors. The atmosphere was almost surreal, as if frozen in another dimension. No hurried footsteps, no keyboard sounds, no beeping badges. Just the steady sound of Walter's mop and the discreet sighs of the ventilation systems. While his father was cleaning the corridors of the 8th floor, Elijah had ventured, silently, into one of the large glass-enclosed meeting rooms. The door had been left ajar, without a lock. Inside, everything remained as it was, chairs slightly moved, cups half full, and above all, a huge whiteboard covering an entire wall. What he saw froze him in place. The board was filled with equations, diagrams, arrows. Nonlinear predictive models, of the crossed polynomial functions, of the Markov algorithms, of the nested Bayesian networks, of the multivariable partial derivatives, all written in nervous handwriting, punctuated with question marks and crossings out. It was clearly a high-level predictive optimization problem, likely intended to tweak a behavioral AI engine, perhaps a secret project under development in the upper floors. Elijah wasn't afraid. He didn't feel like an intruder. Rather, he felt an invitation. It was as if the board was speaking to him. He approached it slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the black marker hanging from the corner. He picked it up without thinking, almost in a trance. His eyes moved from line to line, quickly, methodically. He identified redundancies, unnecessary dependencies, misaligned logic. The engineers had clearly tried to solve an overly complex model by piling on layers of formulas, hoping the volume would mask the imprecision. But Elijah saw the faults. He understood the intention, but also perceived what was blocking the system. He had started to tangentially erase certain expressions, has replaced a sigmoidal function with a ReLU function better suited to the implicit dataset, has reduced a sequence of transformations into a compact expression, and configure the transition matrix of the Bayesian model. He had even introduced a bold hypothesis: what if user behavioral noise was not an anomaly but a signal compressible? He then modified the formula for weighting random variables, incorporating a factor inspired by quantum physics models he had read the previous week in a forgotten article on arcs4.org. He did all this in silence, focused, breathing slowly. He wasn't looking for recognition or validation. He was solving a puzzle, as he had dreamed of. In less than 15 minutes, the picture had been transformed. It wasn't a final solution, but it was a more logical, more fluid, more efficient structure. He came from reduce the computational requirement of the model by at least 30 to 40% by removing redundant cycles, while maintaining, or even improving, predictive accuracy. When he put the marker down, Elijah stepped back, took in the whole thing, and then sat down in a corner of the room. He didn't need approval. He had simply done what seemed obvious to him. What he didn't yet know was that this gesture, born of sincere curiosity, would change the course of one's existence, and that in less than an hour, the doors of this room were about to open onto a man who would never forget him. Towards 22:07 the doors to the main hall had opened a crack with a soft hiss. A tall, wiry man with impeccably styled salt and pepper hair was striding purposefully through the empty corridors. Graham P. Callahan, CEO of Stratonix Technologies for 12 years, was returning to pick up a briefcase containing sensitive documents. He had planned to retrieve it within minutes and return home discreetly. He hated the unexpected, and human error even more. As he was about to enter his office, a detail caught his attention. A light left on in one of the large glass meeting rooms. Strange. This wasn't planned. Callahan hated waste, and even more so carelessness. He approached, tense. As he entered the room, he stopped dead in his tracks. In front of him, the whiteboard was covered in equations. But not the equations he had seen the day before. Someone had modified, deleted, reorganized the data. And it wasn't just a cleanup, there was a new logic, a structure, rigorous reasoning in every felt-tip pen stroke. Callahan frowned. He recognized the patterns immediately, it was the heart of the Hermes project, a predictive intelligence platform that his team was developing in secret, and which was costing them several $100 million. He felt his stomach knot. Someone had introduced it here. Someone had had a chesto these confidential equations. And even worse, this person had corrected them. His reaction was immediate. He took out his phone, called the head of security, demanding to check the cameras from the last few hours, and then called Walter Harris, the only employee present in the building at that time. A few minutes later, Walter arrived at a run, panting, his hands still in latex gloves. Behind him trotted Elijah, his eyes wide open, visibly worried. Callahan tensely pointed at the painting. "Who did this?" Walter stammered. He hadn't seen the altered painting yet. "Mr. Callahan, it's probably my son. I'm sorry. He's just curious. He didn't break anything. He just looked." He was looking at Elijah now, almost pleading with his eyes. But Callahan didn't raise his voice. On the contrary, his tone had lowered, as when questioning a fragile witness. He slowly approached Elijah, then crouched slightly to be at his eye level. His gaze was sharp, but not aggressive. "You're Elijah, right? Walter's son?" Elijah nodded slowly. "Do you understand what you wrote here?" The silence lasted 2 long seconds. Then Elijah answered in a calm, almost detached voice. "Yes, sir. I just simplified the models. They oversampled too many independent variables and created unnecessary computational cycles. I reduced the number of layers, corrected the adaptive learning rate, and proposed a more efficient Bayesian transformation. I hope I didn't do anything stupid." A silence absolute settled into the room. Walter held his breath. He expected immediate dismissal. Humiliation. But Graham Callahan said nothing. He stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on the board. Then, without saying a word, he took a few steps back, walked over to his phone, and dialed a number. "Mark, it's Callahan. Tell me you're still in the lab." "Perfect. Go down to the 8th floor, Atlas room, immediately. Bring Rachel and Jim with you." "No, I'm not kidding. I need you to see this painting. Now." He hung up. Then turned to Elijah. His expression had changed. From suspicion had been born a fierce curiosity, and respect prudent, almost a hint of fascination. "You're going to stay a while, okay? What you just did, young man, it could very well be the breakthrough my team has been seeking for months. And if it is, you just disrupted more than you know." Walter opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Elijah, however, stood there with his hands behind his back, modest and a little confused. He had never tried to impress anyone. He had just answered a question that no one had asked him. The Monday morning, well before the usual arrival of staff, the corridors of Stratonix Technologies buzzed with unusual agitation. Directors, engineers, analysts, and research managers were climbing towards the 8th floor, urgently summoned by a message from Graham P. Callahan himself. A simple mention in the subject of the email, "Critical Meeting, Hermes Project, Atlas Room," was enough to interrupt the day's plans. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the meeting room was packed. The brightest minds of the company, graduates of MIT, Harvard, Caltech, Stanford, NASA alumni, ex-Google DeepMind employees, mathematicians, behavioral data modelers. All expected a strategic announcement, perhaps even a crisis. But what they saw upon entering left them stunned. In the front row, sitting next to Graham Callahan, stood a 17-year-old black teenager, with a calm look, wearing a button-down shirt a little too big for him, a notebook in his hands. To his left, a little back, stood Walter Harris, straight as a board, uncomfortable in his maintenance uniform, his gaze fixed on the ground. Callahan wasted no time. He stood up, tapped the table with a dry finger, and said in a calm but firm voice, "What you're about to hear today won't come out of this room. This isn't an ordinary presentation. This boy here, Elijah Harris, the son of our maintenance man, discovered a structural flaw in our Hermes model this weekend. And what's more, he proposed a redesign that could transform our entire predictive system. I've asked him to explain it to you himself." A murmur ran through the room. Skeptical, surprised, curious looks. Elijah stood up, a little stiff, but not panicking. He looked around at the room full of world-renowned experts, took a breath, and then began to speak. And from the first minute, the room fell silent. He didn't read any script. He didn't recite. He explained. With a surgical clarity, and your calm and implacable logic, he had started by dismantling the current structure of the Hermes project. He had highlighted the inconsistencies of the model, the redundant cycles, the artificial weights created by misreading weak signals in behavioral data. Then he drew his own architecture on the board. His writing was clear, his gestures precise. He evoked the dynamic Bayesian networks, the signal compression heuristics, the regularization functions inspired by natural processes, as if it were obvious to him. Some engineers were frantically taking notes. Others stood frozen, mouths half open. At no point had Elijah tried to impress that he spoke like a patient professor, explaining the basics of algebra to beginners. Yet he advanced into such complex terrain that even the brightest students in the room had to mentally reread his reasoning. At the end of his presentation, Elijah stopped, erased the marker from his fingers, and simply said, "That's it. That's what I saw. And what I tried to do." A heavy silence fell. Then, the technical director, a certain Dr. Leonard Croft, leaned toward Callahan and whispered, his gaze fixed on the painting. "We can win 2 years of development with that, and save at least $100 million. Maybe more. It has just solved a bottleneck that was thought to be insoluble without changing the architecture." A few more seconds passed. Then someone at the back of the room began to applaud. Slowly. Timidly. Another followed. Then another. Very quickly, the entire room resounded with frank and hearty applause. Walter, who had stepped back toward the wall with his head bowed, felt his eyes fill with tears. But he didn't move. He looked at his son, standing in the middle of all these giants, and he said to himself, "Sharon, you would be so proud." Callahan, meanwhile, stood up again. He waited for silence to return, then made a decision. Public, irrevocable, historical. Starting today, Stratonics supports Elijah Harris's entire higher education a full scholarship, direct mentoring with our research team, and a paid internship contract commensurate with their talent. Walter opened his mouth, moved, and whispered, "Sir. I don't want him to get special treatment. I never wanted." But Callahan interrupted him gently, without arrogance, without coldness. "It is not net special treatment, Walter. This boy just did in one night what our R&D department couldn't do in a year. He has saved a strategic project. He rewrote the future of our company. What your son accomplished with an old marker, alone, in an empty room, is beyond anything I've seen in my 40-year career. And I won't let that talent fade into obscurity." The room fell silent again. But this time, it was a silence of respectful admiration. And at that precise moment, Elijah was no longer the janitor's son. He had become the prodigy of Stratonics. 2 years later, the campus of Stanford, bathed in the Californian sun, echoed with the sound of bicycles, the laughter of students, and the heated debates in the lecture halls. At the heart of this vibrant world, Elijah Harris, now 19 years old, was pursuing Agile degree in applied mathematics and cognitive sciences. He still carried the same humility as he had back then, but his gaze had sharpened. He no longer shunned the spotlight, he walked through it with the gravity of those who know their intelligence is a duty, not a trophy. He worked remotely for Stratonics, with a special contract tailored by Callahan himself. He oversaw a small team of senior researchers, all older than him, but none of them challenged his position. It wasn't his age that mattered, it was his vision. Elijah saw systems as entire landscapes, read patterns like clouds, and saw hidden agendas in the noise of data that took others months to identify. He lived frugally, in a modest student residence. He spent his weekends solving open problems, proposing new avenues of research, or simply walking alone in the hills, a notebook always in hand. Despite the requests, the invitations to conferences, the offers from Google, Tesla, even MIT, he remained faithful to Stratonics. During this time, Walter Harris had not left his post. Despite the multiple offers of early retirement, of honorary promotion, of supervisory position, he had always declined. He had simply told Callahan, "As long as I can push a broom and walk these halls, I'll stay." He didn't need money. Since Elijah's ascension, they were debt-free and fearless. But this building represented much more than a workplace. For him, these walls told a story. The birth of a miracle, the moment when his son, that lonely little boy obsessed with numbers, had finally been recognized, heard. Every morning, Walter arrived a little before 6 a.m. He cleaned the offices, greeted new employees, and comforted stressed young interns. He was respected. He was called Mr. Harris now, and it was no longer out of distracted politeness, but out of sincere gratitude. Some came to talk to him so he could tell them how it all began. And every day, when he passed by the Atlas room, he stopped for a few seconds. The door remained open by tradition, even when it wasn't in use. The whiteboard had been preserved. Framed behind a protective glass pane, Elijah's original equations remained as he had drawn them that fateful evening. Then Walter would resume his tour. He never tired of walking in this space where the impossible had been made possible. An autumn Tuesday, as the russet leaves began to carpet the sidewalks, a young, newly recruited employee stopped in front of Walter, intrigued. He pointed to the bronze plaque attached to the entrance of the building, just below the Stratonics logo. He read aloud, hesitating a little over the words. To Walter Harris, man in the shadows, and to Elijah, unexpected genius. Knowledge recognizes neither status nor origin. The young man turned his eyes to Walter, who stood there, his back a little hunched, but straight in his gray uniform. He seemed ready to say something. But Walter, as always, simply smiled. A humble, deep smile, full of everything he had never said. Then he answered softly, in a peaceful voice. I never wanted to be written about on metal. I just wanted him to have a chance. And now that he has, I'm happy here. And with that, he picked up his broom again and walked slowly down the light-filled corridor, head held high, heart at peace.